How's it going? My name is Jeff Welpley. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called GetHuman. How many people here have heard of GetHuman before? Raise your hand. Okay, so a fair number of people. So we've been around for a while, started by the founder of Kayakcom. He created a website just like a la Craigslist, kind of like throwing it up there a long time ago, which had contact information for companies, cheat sheets to get to customer service reps. And over the years, since we made it a kind of real viable business, we built on that and added like robots that wait on hold for you and a lot of other things. But about 3 years ago, we were doing well. We had millions of people coming to the site every month, and we decided to raise some money. And we had this idea of how to take it further, how to be more than just a content site, because that's really what it was before, just a content website. And so we raised money, we hired a bunch of people, and we basically added to our website this button so that you couldn't just, in addition to just getting information, you could hire us. We could solve your problem for you. And this made sense to us at the time. We hired people to build a native mobile app. It was actually a very good app, and built by someone that some of you guys may know, Rob Laverty, someone in the NativeScript community for a while. It was very well built. It was built on time. It worked exactly the way that we wanted it to work. However, this particular product and this idea didn't go that well. This was a chart of our overall site traffic and usage, and right here is where we started introducing this paid service idea. And this is where we ended up when we finally shut it down 10 months later, where we lost 60% of our traffic, and everybody was sad, and it was just not good. And it led to a lot of introspective thinking when this type of thing happens, because we still had money in the bank. It wasn't like we were dead in the water. We could still do something, but clearly this was not working, right? So we brought everybody together, thinking more about what do we do wrong? Seemed like such a good idea at the time. What could we have done better? And it got us thinking about, in general, why do products fail? And after a lot of research, and I think there's sort of general consensus that there's 3 primary reasons why. One is that you're trying to fix a non-existent problem. You think it's a problem, and maybe it's a problem to a few people, but in terms of like the larger scope of the universe and people that would actually be viable customers, it's a non-existent problem. Or the second thing is that a failure to understand the needs of your customer. This one is actually a much more frequent problem, where you think you understand your users, but you don't really. This is actually one of the biggest things that we had with this product, this thing that we tried to introduce at GetHuman. We thought we understood what our customers wanted, but we really didn't at that time. Or you're targeting the wrong market. You try to sell it to certain people, but you really should be selling it to these other people. So these are the 3 different common challenges that people run into. And you can actually think of these in terms of product risks to your business. And you could simplify them even more to either problem risk, solution risk, or channel risk. And there's a big school of thought where you promoted by this company, or this book, Lean Analytics, and this way of thinking called Lean Analytics, where you shouldn't be thinking about building a product at all. You should be thinking about de-risking your business. And believe me when I say this, that it is extremely hard for a software developer to not think about building a product. You want to build, like you have an idea, you just want to sit in your cube for 10 months or whatever and build this amazing idea that you have. That is a very natural instinct for us as builders, but it is the wrong instinct. It is something that causes more failures than you could possibly imagine. If instead we think in terms of de-risking, that we have our idea, or we have a thought of something that may work, and how can we turn that from a unvalidated idea to something that we're more sure about. And so lean analytics encourages coming up with a hypothesis. I don't know what the reality is. I don't actually know the truth, but I have hypothesis, and I need to validate those hypotheses. They also have a framework for different stages that you go through. I'm not actually going to go through all of these. It's a very good way of thinking, but in terms of like actionable stuff that I wanted to kind of parlay today, this isn't quite what I want to, but I do encourage you guys to read lean analytics and kind of think through these kind of stages that they bring out. For us, though, we wanted to take this and formulate our own methodology for how we approach products and de-risking the business. And another major influence was this guy, Brian Balfour, founder and CEO of Reforge. Very happy guy, very big smile. And he has brought up this idea of creating this growth model for your business, where you define in like a one-page sheet exactly what, how you get your customers, how you grow your company, and how you keep people happy. And so we took a lot of this, so a lot of my presentation comes from both the lean analytics thinking and Brian Balfour's presentations and thoughts. And we started to formulate our own ideas. And over the course of many months after this sort of dramatic fall, we started to build ourselves back up again. We started to rethink the way we were doing things. We started to think more about the customer and de-risking the business. And it's been great that we have gotten back to where we were, actually even better than where we were at our height before. In addition to that, we actually along the way launched several other new products. And actually, I shouldn't say launch new products, because that's part of the thing. We've been testing out new hypotheses in different directions as well, which is sort of a natural extension when you start thinking down this road. So normally, it would seem completely insane to me for a small startup to be working on 4 different things at the same time. But it makes a lot more sense when you think of each of these things not as fully fleshed out products, but as different ideas that are in different stages along this life cycle that we're trying to validate. And so we came up with our own product life cycle with the way that we wanted to build products. And that's kind of what I'm going to go over today, where you have 3 stages: pre-build, before you build anything and just focus on validation; your MVP, where there's a certain set of metrics you're trying to reach to achieve and be sure that you've built the right thing; and then the growth phase. In each of these phases, there's something you have to achieve before you get to the next phase, and you are thinking differently within each phase. So within this next 30 minutes or whatever we have here, I want to go through each of these and talk about examples and how you can do it. And with regards to native development, where does native fit into all of this? Okay. So first of all, for pre-build, basically before we're building anything, there are sort of some tools in your toolbox that you should be using. And I'm going to bring up some of the stuff that we use. You don't have to use these exact same things, but something like them is usually really good. So one of them is userinterviews.com. You need people to be able to give you feedback. And if you don't have a product and you don't have any way of getting customers to naturally give your feedback, you have to pay for feedback, basically. But user interviews is a pretty cost-efficient way of doing that. You can basically get, for a couple $100, you can get like a dozen people who do one-on-one time with you for like a half an hour, answer your questions. You could see the screen share, and then you move on. So for all of the different steps within pre-build, we personally use user interviews. You'll have to, if you're trying to use something else, you'll have to have some other way to bring other people in. I do warn you, though, try to avoid friends and family. Friends and family typically don't give you the best feedback. Their view is biased. You really want unbiased views from people that you just don't know. So the other thing is with lookback.io, again, this is just an example. You don't have to use this specific thing. But the thing I like about lookback.io is that when we have people in for a user interview, we can see both the screen that they're working on, their screen, and what they're clicking on and where their mouse is, or their finger or whatever. And then we could see their facial expression right next to it, both of which helps while you're trying to evaluate, kind of get different cues of what a person is thinking and feeling. Okay, so in the pre-build phase, there's 3 things going on. The first thing is validating the problem. And it amazes me how much, both I've failed to do this in the past and how much most startups fail to do this very basic thing, validating that what you're doing is actually even solving a problem in the first place. And when you're talking about validating a problem, really what you're doing is finding your target demographic, finding that group of people who have the problem that you're talking about in a deep, painful way, and that it's reoccurring. Those are kind of like the 2 really important things that you need. So for reoccurring, it would be great if you built a Halley's Comet app. It could be the best Halley's Comet app in the world, but it'd only be used once every 80 years or whatever. That would not be good. It's acceptable, like at least for the way we evaluate things, it's acceptable if the pain point occurs like once a month. If it's any longer than that, it has to be like a really big margins in order to justify it. But even then, it makes it much tougher to iterate. So for us at least, we have a limit that it has to be something that occurs at least once a month, ideally once a week, or really great once a week, ideally once a day. Multiple times a day would be, almost never happens, but that would be really, really awesome. And for painful, this is something that I think people think that the problem they're solving is painful, but is it really? For our VendorSmith product, we had a pitch. One of the first pitches that we gave people. VendorSmith is a product that helps people optimize their cloud usage, their usage of either AWS or GCP. And one of the first pitches we gave was, okay, if you are paying over $10,000 a month on AWS, we guarantee that we will save you $1,000 a month, guaranteed. Now, that sounded really good to us at the time, something like really pain-free, immediately $1,000 back in somebody's pocket. But what we found when we started pitching it is that it just didn't work, because the companies that spend $10,000 or more a month typically have somewhere in the order of like 25 to 50 employees, and the expense for employees far outweighs the expense for their cloud services. It's a drop in the bucket. And so the prospect of spending any amount of time just to save $1,000 is actually not even worth it to them. The pain wasn't deep enough. So we had to kind of change what we were doing there and try a different tactic. For Hitmatic, another product that we've been working on to help people, sort of like a consumer reports for clothes and apparel, where we help people do the research ahead of time. We do the research ahead of time for them to find high quality clothes that is relatively inexpensive. And so when we did our user interviews, we presented these kind of 3 potential problems. Finding a product with the right features, finding a product that's high quality and worth the money, or finding a store with reasonable price and free shippings and returns. So the reason why we did multiple ones is because if you do just one problem statement that you're trying to present to somebody, I think it takes a little thinking and ruminating, or at least that's the way that our experience when we've been doing these, for somebody to realize what their actual pain level is. In general, people always think at first that the pain is less than it really is. And so typically when we present multiple options, we tell them, okay, put this in order of importance. They put it in order. Almost every time, then when we ask the second thing of, okay, go back through and rate your pain level for each of these on a scale of 1 to 10. Almost always, the thing that they rate the highest is not actually the thing that they rated number 1, because they've had a chance to think through it and think about, relatively speaking, what the pain level of one versus another. And the other interesting thing is that as far as the metrics that we look for, it's for 4 out of the 5 people at any given group of user interviewees, that they rate the pain 7 or more out of 10. And the reason, normally I would say 9 or 10, or at least that's when we started off, that's what I thought we'd be looking for. But no one rates it their pain a 10. I think, or my guess, I guess, is that people want to be tough, seem tougher than they are, or like, I don't know, not admit that, that something is painful, something along those lines. But majority of people, their highest they'll do is 7 or 8. 7 or 8 basically is 9 or 10 in most cases. And this comes from like hundreds of interviews, that user interviews that we've done. It's pretty consistent. And as far as 4 or 5, it's never going to be perfect. No matter what you do, even if you have, even if you have the perfect setup and the perfect filtering criteria, there's always going to be some weird thing that happens with one of them. So if you can consistently get 4 out of 5 people, and it's that filtering criteria that is the key output for this step of the pre-build phase. So when you're doing user interviews, you are accepting people into user interview based off of essentially demographic filtering. So saying, okay, they have to be 20 to 30 years old, they have to be from rural areas, they have to have bought a pair of designer jeans within the past month. It could be anything. But that filtering criteria is super, super invaluable, because that means if you can consistently get people specifying that they have extreme pain for the problem that you're solving based off of that criteria, that means you can recreate getting those people in other situations, and that's super valuable. All right, now validating the solution. And we use Sketch. A lot of people who have done design uses something like Sketch. Obviously requires a little bit of work to kind of design something, but it's much easier than actually writing code. And then you can show them images. It definitely works. We've done plenty of user interviews validating essentially just images, and you can get a lot of good feedback. One thing that's like a step more than that is has anyone ever heard of Webflow here or used Webflow before? Okay, yeah, a couple people, great. So I love Webflow, great for creating quick, interactive mocks quick versions of what you're trying to do. And sometimes people use it for their production site moving forward, but most of the time when I've just used it for kind of these quick interactive mock-ups. And it's very useful, a lot of features, highly recommend it. Or there's a third option for validating your solution, which is to not validate your solution, but validate somebody else's solution. Now, why would you want to do this? A lot of times, we like to think that we're original, but really, most of the time we're taking ideas from other people and we're kind of like repackaging them and maybe adding like an extra feature or two or something like that. But it's it's totally fine to focus on some other product that somebody else has that has some similar characteristics to what you're trying to build, and focus the user interview on those characteristics. So we didn't actually do this, but this is an example where for Wally, which is a budgeting app, it has a feature which is this single number budget, which is very similar to what we were building for Swish, which is a budgeting app as well, something that we built, Swish. And so we could have, if we wanted to, interviewed people with the Wally app even before we had anything for Swish, and talked to them about their experience with that single number budget and where it worked or didn't work, what other issues there were. This is like really valuable. It gives you way more insight than your own evaluation. I know I'm used to this to when I'm building something and I look at competitors and I do my own evaluation and you think you know, but a lot of times my first inclination is like, oh, this other app sucks. I'm going to do something much better. Forget about that. But if the app is popular, there's a reason why it's popular. And if you don't see that right away, then these types of user reviews can be super valuable by seeing what your potential customers that you're trying to convert to your app see in this other thing. So that's just one other option for validating the solution. So your goal is in this phase is to identify the key features. What are the key features of the app that you're going to be building? The metrics you're using is enthusiasm level. Now, we have tried in these user interviews to like ask certain questions that basically have the user tell us their enthusiasm level in one way or another, and that never works. The thing, at least again for us, the way that we've sort of settled on is that we don't actually ask them this directly. What we do is we usually have 3 to 4 team members that are sitting in on the user interview, and we subjectively gauge ourselves individually without showing each other at first what we think their enthusiasm level is, just based off of our own personal reaction. And you get better at this over time after doing a bunch of these user interviews. And it's only if every one of the 4 of us rates it a 9 or 10 that we say that person is truly a 9 or 10 for enthusiasm level. And it's valuable even if you don't rate them a 9, 10, if one of the team members doesn't, because it elicits a lot of conversation of like, okay, why? Like, what did they do that wasn't enthusiastic? And actually, even more valuable is, again, you're using filtering criteria to get these people in the user interview to ask them about this. So then you can go back to the filtering criteria and say like, okay, why did this person come in through this filtering criteria? Do we have to like adjust that? Is it something that we need to adjust the filtering criteria, or it was just a one-off weird thing with this person, they were having a bad day or whatever else? So all super valuable. Extra bonus is referrals. If the person is willing to say, with an app that doesn't even exist yet, that they want their friends and their family to be involved either like as part of another user interview, or that they think that their friends and family would use this in the future. If they say it unsolicited, that's like even better. But even if you ask them directly, say, hey, you get the feeling that their enthusiasm level is pretty high, so you could ask them directly, hey, would your friends and family use this? If they say, maybe, I mean, you got to gauge it a little bit, but like the people that are true, like thumbs up, are the ones that are just like, oh my God, yes. Because it is a super hard thing. I mean, it's one thing for a person to like a new product, but if a person is willing to use their own social capital to refer it to other people, that is even better. And the bigger bonus is only for certain products this works, but if somebody is willing to write a check right there. So this wouldn't work for some of the stuff that we've done because they're like free apps, or it doesn't involve a transaction right away, but for especially a lot of B2B stuff, this could happen theoretically. I don't know how often it does, but if it does, I mean, that is good. So the outputs for this phase is the high-level design. So you should have a pretty good general, maybe not everything, but a good high-level design for your app. A list of early adopters, those people that did have the high enthusiasm level, you definitely keep all of their email addresses and their contact information, because at later phase you'll see we need them to be early adopters. And then refined demographics, like I said, all the filtering criteria. All right, the third thing is validating the channel. And channel means how people get into your app, how you acquire users. And so there's actually a pretty limited number of different channels. I mean, maybe there's a couple other weird ones that aren't on this list, but this is pretty much it. And when we're talking about validating the channel pre-build before there's a product, we can eliminate some of them right off the bat that actually really require there to be a product. But these other ones you can validate to some degree, one way or another. So for some of these, they do require people. So like a lot of the sales-oriented stuff, especially if you're doing a B2B app, you can have your people just talk to other corporations, or just get on the ground and talk to other people and do some levels of validation for sales. For marketing-related stuff and ads, you can, if you have money especially, it is very worthwhile to pay for a Facebook ad, even though you don't actually have a product. I mean, it's no big deal that like you do your best to craft a ad that entices people to click on it, and then it just goes to some other landing pages, coming soon or whatever, it doesn't matter. But just the fact that they're clicking on it and you're getting those conversions, you start to get the unit economics of whether ads are a viable channel for you. So definitely recommend doing that. And then the one that's kind of tougher is either content marketing or SEO. Typically, like, these are tough to do without a actual product, but they can be done. They require a little bit of time, and arguably it's good to get started with them anyways early, because they do require kind of a build up in momentum. But with all of these, what you're looking for is this channel viable to bring in our first 100,000 users, depending on what type of app you're building, at a reasonable cost. You don't have to worry about whether this channel is going to be the thing that gets you to 1 billion users or whatever. Typically, as your company grows, you change channels. You bring in other channels, they modify them. One works at a later stage that they don't at an early stage. So you just have to focus on that initial group of users. Is this going to be viable for our initial group of users? Anything you can do to validate it, the more the better. All right. Now, Red Sox fans?
Go Sox.
Yes. Let's talk about the MVP. So Mookie is definitely the MVP for the Sox and for baseball, but the MVP we were talking about is building your initial product, and I think there's a lot of different thinking on this, or potentially different than the way that we've been thinking about it. In terms of it doesn't just mean a shittier version of your product. It means a product that doesn't have as many features. In fact, what you should be doing, because you went through the solution validation step, you should have identified what are those most important features, what are the specific things that are solving their problem, and then only implement those top 1 or 2, as little as possible. So it's not that it is a app that doesn't work that well. It should work very well, but it just doesn't have that many bells and whistles. And it's viable that it solves the core problem for your target demographic. It doesn't have, and this is key, for your target demographic. Don't worry about the fact that it doesn't solve your problem for all the millions of other people out there. Just focus on your core right now. And it's not fake. It's not throwaway. You're not building this as I hear that a lot of people are just going to throw out something and then just to get something out there. No, that's not going to really be helpful. All right, so as far as native development, so this brings up the question, so for your MVP, should you build a native app or should you build a web app? And I mean, then there's maybe other possibilities, depending on the circumstance, building a desktop app or a Chrome app or something, but let's just keep to native or web for a second. And in my mind, at least with our methodology, it really comes down to 2 main things in this question. First of all, is one of those 1 or 2 top features that are important that you're trying to build in your MVP, do they require the native platform? So are they something where you've got to access your contact list on your phone or something like that you can't do over the web? Then yes, build native. Or if the target demographic requires that it's on the native platform, then yes, build native. Otherwise, build web for the MVP. You'll be able to iterate faster. You'll be able to focus more on the actual things that are important rather than some of the extra overhead. That doesn't mean that you aren't building for native, because I strongly believe in native and that there's value later. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But you should set yourself up for the future by utilizing one of these 2 options. So these are actually for people that are doing Angular and NativeScript. So if you're doing Vue or you're doing something other than NativeScript, you got to find a different option. But these are examples for if you do Angular and NativeScript of a way to build for the web, but set yourself up to build for native later. They are XPlat, which was built by myself and Nathan Walker from InStudio, and it allows you to build side by side as well as with the NativeScript schematics. Both very good options, slightly different philosophies. You can't go wrong with either. All right, so for the MVP, your first job is to find your first group of diehard fans. Remember we said that when you're doing validation, to keep track of all those people that did rate your solution a 9 out of 10, you go back to them, see who can come into use your initial MVP. Even if they rated them a 9 or 10, they won't necessarily be your diehard fans. You have to typically go out and just manually, you're not trying to, you're not going to be able to bring in 1 million different people, and you don't want actually too many people at this point. Because when you have a small set of diehard people using your product from the beginning, what you're really trying to get to is a high rate of iteration of change, where you have people giving you feedback constantly, people that are using it every day. These are the people that have the pain and want to this solution to fix that pain, and they are going to tell you when it's not doing the right thing or it's missing something or whatever. And so when you're working with this small group of people, you're not distracted by all these weird edge cases that don't really matter. These are the people that are going to be your bread and butter. And so you work with them and you make changes every day until they get to a point where they are all very satisfied. And the key metric here is that basically they're still using it nearly every day, or whatever the cadence is for your particular app. But they aren't necessarily asking you anymore for changes. Like when they get to that point, they basically just love using it and they don't need any more changes. So like that's the thing that you're really going for here. Then you can focus on validating acquisition. So this is bringing in new users. So you go back to the channels that we mentioned for the first part before we built the product, but now we have a product so we can use any of these different channels. And we start actually trying to bring people in to see what it takes to get somebody into our platform. The key thing you're trying to find here is your CAC. So for people that haven't done stuff on the business side, I realize that some of these businessy terms are scary a little bit, but this is super important. Your cost of acquiring a customer. It's one of the two most important numbers when you're building a product to understand, to have very good data on. And we made the mistake when we were pitching actually Get Human back in the day. We said, our CAC is 0 because we already have 5 million people visiting the site every day, and that was just wrong. CAC is about what it takes to acquire new users from what you have, and the fact that people naturally come to our site already is totally irrelevant. It's a matter of, if I want to get another 1,000 people into the site, what's it going to cost me, basically. And so know this number, figure it out, and then you can move on to the next one, which is determining the value. So this is the other side of the equation, determining the lifetime value of your users. And whereas CAC is a pretty simple thing to calculate, I mean, it's your costs and then the number of users that come into your system through your channel, lifetime value is really hard to calculate. It's different for each company. If you have a free product, it's even harder. But you can actually have a number here, even if you have a free product. You basically have a potential LTV, and it can be somewhat fudged, but you should have some sort of methodology around this that you, your investors, everybody else involved in your company agree on, and something you can track. And there is stuff out there you'll find on the web for examples of how to calculate LTV. I wouldn't necessarily pay attention to any of these, they're sort of ridiculous. My investor and board member, David Frankel, if any of you guys know this guy from Founder Collective, he always says, Jeff, know your cohorts. That's terrible South African accent, but he basically says that because when you are calculating LTV, it's not just coming up with the calculation for it, but it's also calculating it over time for each segment of users. So, for example, your users that come in July you got to track them separately over time than the people who come in August, than the people who come in September. The reason is because theoretically, over time, you're making changes, you're updating the system, you're improving the way the system works, and theoretically, your LTV per cohort should be increasing over time. So even though your overall average of everybody is let's say $5 or whatever, if the most recent 3 cohorts are more $15, that's much more impressive, right? And the thing that you're trying to get to here, so this is the key metric before you move on to the growth phase, is getting your LTV to CAC ratio either 2 to 1 or above. Actually, a healthy business, the guideline that they say is LTV 3 to 1. That's the common wisdom or whatever. But in terms of just this process and moving forward from the MVP to growth, 2 to 1 is pretty safe because it shows that at least it's on a unit economic basis, the business is viable. Even if it's fake LTV, with a free product and it's just potential LTV, still, you potentially have a viable business. If it's anything less than 2 to 1, there's too many things that can go wrong where it goes on the flip side, and then you're just burning money. So this is like the key thing, and stick in your MVP phase with a small number of users until you get this correct. Then you move on to growth, which is fun, right? And we go back to our channel at the top of our funnel, and we start trying to optimize it. Most of the optimization for funnel optimization, not for all channels, but for a lot of it, ends up being a lot of A/B testing. So this is where there's different tools to do this, but you are creating hypothesis of how to like make small, tiny improvements to your funnel, and you throw both things out there, you see which one does better, and then you kind of change it over time. So creating a good kind of A/B testing framework and running constant experiments is super important. The other thing is just, if you have the unit economics in place that, that LTV to CAC ratio, you should theoretically be able to just throw money at your channel and just ramp up the number of people coming in, because they should be getting you that more than that whatever you're paying back. So again, depending on if you did a good job, you should be able to just start pouring money in. But most of the time people don't perfectly calculate their LTV to CAC initially during the MVP phase. So you should kind of ramp things up kind of slowly. You shouldn't just throw like $1 million into your Facebook ad spend right away. You should kind of do it slowly, ramp it up and up, just to make sure that those ratios stay healthy. The second thing is acquisition loops. So once a person comes through one of your channels and is part of your app, an acquisition loop is when that user turns into bringing in other users. So there's a couple different examples of this. There's kind of 4 different categories of viral loops, where they tell their friends in different ways and bring them in. Content loops, where the user is generating content of some sort that becomes search indexed, and then that content brings in other people. Or paid ad loops, or B2B sales loops. And with all of these, the idea is that your channel is linear. Whatever money or time you put into your channel, that's pretty much what you're going to get back out of it. But loops are exponential. The more that you have acquisition loops working, the more your growth kind of goes up and to the right in sort of hockey stick fashion. And at the end of the day, acquisition loops lower your CAC, because for the same amount of money you're putting into your channel, you're getting more people back. Now, so you're lowering your CAC with acquisition loops. With retention loops, you're increasing the LTV, increasing the lifetime value of your users. It's just pretty basic that the longer somebody continues using your product, the more valuable they're going to be in general, not always, I guess. But in general, if you did everything else correctly. So your ability to retain users should yield more value, better LTV, et cetera. And how do you retain users? So I'm sure that none of you consciously think about this, but when you get pinged on your phone, like, hey, somebody posted on Facebook, or commented on your post, and you click on that and you go back into Facebook, that is a retention loop. That is getting you back into the app. And so there's a lot of different triggers for retention loops. There's actually 5 main types of triggers, either time-based, location, some sort of change that occurred, one of your peers recommending different things, or some sort of more complex programmatic trigger. But these are all different ways of getting you, keeping you using the app, keeping you engaged. We use, on the back end, this company, Iterable. There's a lot of other similar products, so this isn't the only thing, but I would just highly recommend this. We've tried a bunch of different ones, and this was like by far the one that we like the best. That basically has a workflow engine for user engagement, where you can define a bunch of rules of when and how those types of triggers are sent out to users and then bring them back into your app. So it's very flexible and very powerful. And using this, we've had the fortune of being able to test out what is the best way to bring people back in, and what are the different characteristics that you bring have retention the highest. One of the biggest learnings from this is that native apps are the key for retention. Up until now, obviously, most of my message has been kind of like holding back on building for native because you can iterate faster, or you don't even need to build something in the early validation stages. But this is the point where native apps kill, because native apps just, you'll see this out in the wild, people saying this, but I personally experienced with many of the stuff that we've worked on that we already have a baseline for our usage, for engagement, and once we build that parallel native experience and get users into that, it's like 2 times more. It's way, way more effective. So this is where you want to start utilizing, hopefully if you did use either XPlat or the native script schematics, hopefully it's just a matter of building out some extra views. I mean, it's more complex than that, but it shouldn't be that difficult to add a native app at this point when you've already validated so much. And for us, at least, this means native script. Like I mentioned, we use it, we love it, I can't recommend it enough. Okay. Let's summarize everything that we've talked about so far when it comes to Lean Native. First thing, don't build anything until you validate, right? That should be easy. That should be kind of drilled into your head. I know that even though I know this from doing this over the past year, I still constantly have to remind myself, because as developers, we are constantly drawn to build before we validate, but you have to constantly push back against that. Second thing is that even if you build a web app for MVP, make it easy to add native later. Native is extremely valuable, just not at that early stage, at least with the way that we kind of approach things. But we use XPlat. We have a system that we make our lives easier for setting it up later. And then finally, during the growth phase, native leads to engagement, leads to retention, leads to higher LTV, which means champagne, Ferraris, and good times. Thanks a lot.